Hello, my name is Arina Rivo. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I would like to share with you my experience with knitting a top-down beret. I made these berets using the yarn of various thickness. The brown one is made of worsted yarn, a beige one bulky yarn, the gray ones are both made with light worsted yarn, and the green one I used this very textured thick and thin yarn. They're all made the same way, top down. The only difference will be in the trim. The brown one I finished with 2 rows of a regular rib and an invisible rib bind off, using the same needle size for the crown and for the rib. And the same for the beige one, also 2 rows of a simple rib and an invisible rib bind off. The gray one, again, it's the same top, but the rib, I changed the needle size to a smaller needle, increased the number of stitches, and worked 3 rows of the rib, and also finished with the invisible rib bind off. For the light gray one, I decided to do something a little bit different. After I finished the crown, I worked a few knit stitch rows with a much smaller needle and finished with a sewn bind off to create this rolled up rim. And this is how the sewn bind off looks. If you are not familiar with this method of binding off, I included a demo in the second part of this video. For the green one, because it's very textured and this yarn doesn't create an elastic or springy rib, I decided to finish it with a twisted knit stitch rib and a rim finished with an Icelandic bind off. And it matches the design of a sweater that I made using this yarn as well, so I can have it as a set. So in the first part of this video, I will show how I made the crown for all these berets, and in the second part of the video, I will show in detail the various trim ideas that you can use as well. Here I included a little bit of a demo so you can see the beret on a real person from different sides. This is the dark gray one. I used a regular or rather light worsted yarn. The green one matches my green sweater. It's basically the leftover yarn from the sweater. And you can wear the beret in different ways, to the front, to the side. That's the little tail, or I think it's also called a stalk. And I like to wear it to the back like this. And this is how it looks from the back. This is the dark brown one. I like how it goes with the sweater because it's monochromatic and the sweater is stripy. And this is the light gray one with the rolled up edge. from different sides. And depending on your preference, you can wear it to the side, or even to the front. Sort of looks like a cap. And I like to wear it all the way to the back. This is me outside wearing the brown beret with the brown shawl for a total brown look. And this is the dark gray beret. It's also a very easy one to combine with other gray things. Although I used relatively thick yarn for the berets shown in this video, it can also be made with much finer yarn like this sock yarn or self-striping yarn or fingering weight. The algorithm of knitting the crown is the same, and there are so many possibilities for interesting designs for the band. This is how much yarn of each kind I used for the berets with the needle sizes I used for the crown. I was using a magic loop technique, and I find the most comfortable length for the circular needle was 120 centimeters or 47 inches. For this video, I made this sample with cotton yarn because it has a great stitch definition. I started with a tail or a stalk, followed by 8 increases in every other row. And after I reached the desired size, I changed to just regular knit stitch rows without increasing, and followed by 8 decreases also in every other row. This is the size of the beret after washing. It's about 11 inches in diameter or 28 centimeters. And this is the end of the increased section. And from the center of the beret, it's about 12.5 centimeters until the last increase. Or in inches, that would be almost 5 inches from the center of the beret. And let's measure the straight section. So it's approximately 3 or 3.5 centimeters. That's the section without the increases. And the decrease section is also approximately 3.5 centimeters or 1 inch and 3/8. The band of the brown beret is about 1.5 centimeters or close to 1/2 inch. And the width of the opening is about 14 centimeters or 5.5 inches. That's of the gray beret. And the brown one, it's about 15 centimeters or close to 6 inches. The width of the opening of the beige beret is about the same. It's 14.5 centimeters or 5 inches and 3/4. The beret can be made with yarn of practically any weight, from very fine fingering weight to bulky. And this diagram shows that I was continuing increasing in every other row until the increased section reached 25 centimeters in width. Then I worked approximately 3.5 centimeters of the knit stitch rows without increasing, followed by about 3.5 centimeters of a decreased section. So from the center of the beret, I worked in the round, increasing in every second row until I reached somewhere between 17 to 19 stitches per section, followed by 8 to 10 straight knit stitch rows without increasing. And then I was decreasing in every other row until the sections were reduced to somewhere between 11 to 13 stitches per section. I will start with a tail or a stalk. I'm going to cast on 4 stitches using the long tail cast on method. I move my index finger under the working yarn and my thumb under the tail. The first stitch I will make without the knot by twisting the yarn around the needle, like this. For the second stitch, I move the needle under the tail, over the working yarn, and pull through. Return my thumb under the tail of yarn, move the needle under the tail, over the working yarn, and pull the yarn through. Return my thumb under the tail, move the needle under the tail of yarn, over the working yarn, and pull through. So I cast on 4 stitches. Now instead of turning the work around, I'm going to continue knitting from the other side. I hold the cast on row and pull the needle all the way to the left to move the stitches onto the other needle tip, like this. I took the right needle tip and I will continue knitting from right to left. I take the working yarn and I will make the first knit stitch. And tighten. And work the remaining stitches as knit stitches. I finished the first row after casting on. And now again, instead of turning my work around, I hold the work and pull the needle all the way to the left onto the other needle tip. So I will again continue working from right to left. I'm going to do the second row after casting on. I again grab my working yarn, which is on the left side, and make the first knit stitch, and tighten. And again, work all the remaining stitches as knit stitches. This was the second row after casting on. For the next row, again, I don't turn my work around, but move the needle all the way to the left. Like this. And I'm ready for the third row. Again, I prepare my working yarn, which is on the left, and bring the work closer to the tip. Make the first knit stitch and tighten. And work the remaining stitches as knit stitches. This is 3 rows after casting on. Again, I pull the needle all the way to the left. And I'm ready for the fourth row. This is the fourth row. The working yarn is again on the left side. I make the first knit stitch, tighten, then the second knit stitch, and also tighten a little bit, and knit the remaining 2 stitches. So this is it. I finished all the 4 rows of the I-cord after casting on for the stalk or the tail of the beret. This is how it looks on the other side at the moment, like a little caterpillar. Now I'm going to knit the crown of the beret using the magic loop technique. I move the needle to the left and I will divide the work into 2 groups of 2 stitches each and pull the cord out, creating a loop. Between these 2 groups. So I pull out the cord all the way to the right, like this. So that my work now is going to be on the needle tips. The working yarn is on the right. That's the end of the row. And then I turn my work to the right side and I'm going to continue working using the right needle tip. So to do that, I pull it out enough to create a loop like this. So now I have two loops, one on the left and one on the right. So this is the magic loop. And this is the needle tip I will use to continue the work. I hold the working yarn in position, ready to continue the knitting. And this is the first stitch of the row. And now I'm ready for the first row of the crown. I will knit the first row and make 4 increases, basically doubling up every stitch using a knit in the left loop technique, but twisted to avoid holes. I'm making my first knit stitch, and then I will insert my left needle tip under the loop of the stitch 2 rows below, and I will knit into the stitch but twist it to avoid holes. So I insert the right tip through the back of this loop and place it onto the left needle knitwise, and then knit through the back loop like this. I repeat, make a knit stitch, insert the left needle tip into the stitch 2 rows below, insert the right needle tip through the back of the stitch and return it onto the left tip knitwise like this, and knit this stitch through the back loop. Now I'm going to do the rest of the row. So I need to change the position of my needles. I pull the cord of the left tip and bring the stitches closer to the tip, and then pull out the right needle tip. So again I have 2 loops, one on the right and one on the left. And I will make 2 more increases to finish the first row of the crown. I make a knit stitch, and then insert the left needle tip into the stitch 2 rows below. Insert the right needle tip through the back of this stitch and slip it off, and return it onto the left needle tip knitwise and knit through the back loop of the stitch. And again, make a knit stitch, insert the left tip into the stitch 2 rows below, insert the right needle tip back to front into this stitch, slip it off, return it knitwise onto the left needle tip, and knit this stitch through the back loop. Now the first row of the crown is finished. I turn the work around, move the working yarn behind work, pull the cord all the way to the left so that these 4 stitches will be on the left needle tip. And pull the right needle tip out. The stitches will feel a little tight because I made them twisted to avoid the holes. The working yarn is on the right again, and I will continue working with the right needle tip. And this is the other loop of the magic loop. I'm ready for the second row of the crown. In this row, I knit all the stitches as regular knit stitches. There are no increases. After the first stitch, just tighten a little bit to avoid baggy columns. I finished the first half of the row, and for the second half of the row, I turn the work around, move the working yarn behind work, pull the cord all the way to the left to move the stitches onto the left needle tip, and pull out the right needle tip to create a loop. And again, I have the magic loop. The working yarn is on the right side, and I will continue knitting the second half of the row. I make a knit stitch, tighten at the changeover point, and work all the remaining stitches as knit stitches. I finished the second row of the crown. Now I will knit the third row of the crown. I turn the work around again. Pull the cord to the left, moving the stitches onto the left needle tip. And pull out the right needle tip. Again creating 2 loops of the magic loop. This is another row with the increases, since the increases are made in every other row. I will make 8 increases, doubling up every stitch. Again, it will be knit into the left loop technique, but without twisting. So I knit the first stitch, tighten a little bit at the changeover point, insert the left needle tip into the stitch 2 rows below, and knit into the stitch from right to left. Again, make a knit stitch, insert the left tip into the loop 2 rows below, and knit into that stitch from right to left. Make a knit stitch, insert the left needle tip into the loop 2 rows below, and knit into that stitch from right to left. It's a little tight, yeah. And the last stitch of this half of the row, again make a knit stitch, insert the left tip into the stitch 2 rows below, from back to front, and knit into that stitch from right to left. I finished half of the row. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pairs of stitches, so I have increased by 4 stitches. For the second half of the row, again I pull the cord to the left and place the remaining 4 stitches on the left needle tip and pull the right tip out. It's a little bit tight because it's cotton. The working yarn is behind work. I will finish the second half of the row and make 4 increases. I knit the first stitch after the changeover point, tighten, insert the left tip into the stitch 2 rows below, like this, and knit into the stitch from right to left. Again, make a knit stitch, insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below, from back to front, like this, and knit into the stitch from right to left. Make a knit stitch, insert the left tip into a stitch 2 rows below, from back to front, and knit into the stitch from right to left. Make a knit stitch, insert the left tip into a stitch 2 rows below, and knit into the stitch from right to left. Now I have 4 pairs of stitches on my right needle, so I have increased in total by 8 stitches in the 3rd row. The 4th row is again a regular row without increasing. I turn my work around, pull the cord to the left, and move half of the row onto the left needle tip, like this. Pull the right needle tip out. So again, I created a magic loop. And this is a regular row without increases, so I simply knit all the stitches as regular knit stitches. Just make sure to tighten at the changeover points here. So I make the first knit stitch, tighten a little bit, and continue knitting all the rest of the stitches as knit stitches until I finish half of the row. Like this. Turn the work around. Move the working yarn behind work. Pull the cord to the left. And move the other half of the row onto the left needle tip. Pull the right tip out. To make a loop. And this is the other loop. And I will finish the row. Knit the first stitch, tighten, and work the rest of the stitches as regular knit stitches until the end of the row. And now I finished the 4th row of the crown. The next row is again a row with the increases. I turn the work around, move the working yarn behind work, pull the cord to the left, moving the stitches of the half of the row onto the left needle tip, closer to the tip like this, pull the right needle tip out to create a loop of the magic loop, and that's the other loop. And I'm ready to knit the row. I think now would be a good time to add the markers so we don't forget where we are. What I do, I use a yellow marker that indicates to me the first increase of the row after the first 2 stitches, and then I place the markers of different colors, not yellow, after every 2 stitches, so I know when to make the increases. So here and here. And to me, the yellow marker means that this is the first increase of the row, and that's the beginning of the row between the 2 needles. And I can also place 3 more markers on the other side after every 2 stitches. Using the markers is a great idea, but to me at this point it's a little bit too much. They will be just in my way, so I will remove all the markers except for the yellow one. That's my marker of the first increase of the row, and I simply count how many stitches I have before the marker, so I know after how many stitches I will make an increase. I will knit this row now. This is the row with the increases, and my increases will be after every 2 stitches. So I knit the first stitch, tighten, knit the second stitch, and knit into the left loop. Insert the left needle tip into the stitch 2 rows below, and knit into that stitch from right to left. So I increased by 1 stitch. Move my marker, again knit 2 stitches, insert the left tip into a stitch 2 rows below, and knit into that stitch from right to left. Make 2 knit stitches again, insert the left tip into a stitch 2 rows below, and knit into that stitch from right to left. Knit 2 more stitches, insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below, and knit into that stitch from right to left. So I have increased again by 4 stitches. Now I will do the same for the second half of the row. I pull the cord all the way to the left and move the stitches closer to the tip of the left needle. Pull the right needle tip out to create a loop. Working yarn behind the work, and I will knit the first stitch, tighten at the changeover point, knit the second stitch, insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below, and knit into that stitch. Knit 2 more stitches, insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch from right to left. Knit 2 more stitches. Again, insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch from right to left. And knit the last 2 stitches of the row. Insert the needle tip into the stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch from right to left. So altogether in this row I made 8 increases after every 2 stitches. The 6th row is a regular row without increasing. I turned the work around, moved the working yarn behind the work, pull the cord to the left, bringing the stitches closer to the tip, and pull out the right needle tip, creating a loop. And I will knit this row in a usual way. All the stitches are regular knit stitches. I make the first knit stitch, tighten at the changeover point, and continue working the rest of the stitches as knit stitches. I finished the first half of the row, turn the work around, bring the working yarn to the back, pull the cord to the left to bring all the stitches of the second half of the row closer to the tip of the left hand needle. Pull the right needle tip out. So I have 2 loops of my magic loop. And I will finish the row. Make a knit stitch, tighten at the changeover point, and work all the rest of the stitches as regular knit stitches until the end of the row. Now the row is finished. I turn the work around, bring the working yarn behind the work, pull the cord of the left needle tip all the way to the left to bring the stitches closer to the tip, and pull the right hand needle tip out to create a loop. Now I have 3 stitches before my marker, and I will be making increases after every 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3, increase, 1, 2, 3, increase, and so on. I knit the first stitch, tighten at the changeover point, knit the second stitch, the third stitch, and again make an increase. Insert the left tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit from right to left into the stitch. Move the marker. Again, I will make an increase after 3 stitches. So I knit these 3 stitches, insert the left tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch from right to left. Again, knit 3 stitches, insert the left tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch. Knit the remaining 3 stitches of the half of the row. Insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit from right to left. I finished a half of the row. Turn the work around, bring the working yarn behind the work, and pull the cord of the left needle tip all the way to the left, bringing the stitches closer to the tip. Like this. Pull the right hand needle tip out. And I'm going to finish the row. I make a knit stitch, tighten at the changeover point, knit 2 more stitches, and make an increase. Insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch. Again, knit 3 stitches and make an increase. Insert the left tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit that stitch from right to left. Knit 3 more stitches and make an increase. Insert the left tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch from right to left. Knit the remaining 3 stitches and make an increase. Insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch from right to left. I finished the row and I have increased again by 8 stitches in the row altogether. The next row is again a regular knit stitch row without the increases. I bring the working yarn behind the work, pull the cord of the left needle tip all the way to the left, Bring the stitches closer to the tip. Pull out the right hand needle tip. And I'm going to work all the stitches of this row as regular knit stitches. Make the first knit stitch, tighten at the changeover point, and continue making the regular knit stitches. I finished one half of the row. Turn the work around, bring the working yarn behind the work, pull the cord of the left needle tip to the left, move the stitches closer to the tip, pull out the right hand needle tip to make a loop, and I'm going to finish this row. Make a knit stitch, tighten, and continue until the end of the row, working the regular knit stitches. This is again an increase row. I turn the work around, bring the working yarn behind the work, pull the cord all the way to the left, bringing the stitches closer to the tip of the left hand needle, like this. Pull the right hand needle tip out to create a loop. And now I have 4 stitches before my yellow marker, so I will be making an increase after every 4 stitches. I knit the first stitch, tighten at the changeover point, knit 3 remaining stitches, and make an increase. Again, left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit from right to left. Move the marker, knit 4 stitches, and make an increase. Left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit that stitch from right to left. Again, knit 4 stitches. And make an increase. Left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit from right to left. 4 knit stitches. And an increase. Insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch from right to left. So I'm finished with the first half of the row. Turn the work around, bring the working yarn behind, pull the cord of the left needle tip to the left, bringing the stitches closer to the tip. And pull out the right hand needle tip. Make a knit stitch, tighten at the changeover point, 3 more knit stitches, and an increase. Insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch. Again, make 4 knit stitches, insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch. Make 4 knit stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, and make an increase. Insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch. Knit the last 4 stitches, and make an increase. Insert the left needle tip into a stitch 2 rows below and knit into that stitch from right to left. So I have finished another row, and again I have increased by 8 stitches in this row. Now I turn the work around, pull the cord to the left and bring the working yarn behind the work and move the stitches closer to the tip of the left needle tip and pull the right needle tip out to create a loop. This is a regular row without the increases. I make a knit stitch, tighten at the changeover point, and continue the row, working the knit stitches all the way until the end of the row. I'm finishing the regular row without the increases. The following row is again a row with the increases. I bring the working yarn behind and pull the cord of the left needle tip to the left, like this. And I would continue increasing after every 5 stitches. So I could count after every 5 stitches, make an increase. But I want to show you something else. So I'll pull the cord all the way to one side so I can show you the beginning of the crown. This is how it looks, like a small circle. And the areas where I would do the increases, they become very visible. So they might act as markers. But sometimes the yarn is very difficult to see the stitches clearly. And in that case, it would be very helpful to place markers so you would not miss the increase area. And that's what I recommend. That's the first stitch of the next section. So I place a marker before that stitch. So 5, 5, and then again after 5 stitches, I place another marker before this knit column, and I would do it all the way in the round. So the only area where I could not place a marker would be at the beginning of the row, and also on the opposite side where the other loop of the magic loop would be. So one of the options is to pull the cord out in that area, and the loop will act as a marker. There is an alternative way of doing this. I will return the marker to this spot, and instead of pulling the cord from that spot, I will pull it out from the center of a section almost opposite to the beginning of the row. And I'm going to do the same thing for the beginning of the row. I will move the loop of the magic loop a few stitches to the side, and this way I can place a marker in this area. I will show you how I do this. I will knit 3 stitches, and pull my right hand needle tip out. And by doing this, I moved the loop of the magic loop away from the increase area. And now I can place a marker here, and it's not going to fall out. That's it. Now I have 8 markers. These 2 yellow markers will indicate the areas of the first and the last increases of the row. And to make sure that I will not make a mistake, I'm replacing the first yellow marker with the bigger marker of the first increase of the row. And now I will continue knitting, alternating the rows with the increases with the rows without, until I reach the desired size of my crown. After the circle measures approximately 25 centimeters in diameter, or about 10 inches, I switch to a straight section, which is regular knit stitch rows without the increases. Here you can see how many stitches per section I had when I finished increasing, when I knitted my berets. After I finished increasing, I worked about 3.5 centimeters of regular knit stitch rows without the increases. And here you can see how many knit stitch rows I made for each beret. After I finished the straight sections, I worked about 3.5 centimeters, alternating the decrease rows with the regular rows. This is how many stitches per section I had after I finished decreasing. For the decreases, I moved my markers 1 stitch to the left to make sure that they correspond to the increase sections. And I was decreasing by knitting 2 stitches together before each marker, like this. And this is a short demo. I simply knit 2 stitches together from left to right before each marker. Next, I'll share with you what I did for the band and binding off. First, the ribbed bind off. For the brown beret, I used a 4.5 mm needle for the crown and rib, worked 2 rows of the rib, and finished with the invisible ribbed bind off. For the beige beret, I used a 5 mm needle for the crown and for the rib, worked 2 rows of the rib, and also finished with the invisible ribbed bind off. For the dark gray beret, I used a 4.5 mm needle for the crown, then changed to 3.5 mm, worked 1 knit stitch row, followed by 3 rows of the rib, and finished with the invisible ribbed bind off. In the first row of the rib, I increased each section by 3 stitches, going altogether from 104 stitches to 128 to make the rib more elastic. I also explored a chain bind off. It looks very nice and minimalistic. However, this method of binding off is not very stretchy, and I decided to switch to a different method. But this is how it looks, and I think it looks very nice if you don't need a very stretchy band, this might be a good option. Also, the I-cord bind off looks very good, but it's not very stretchy, so it really depends on your preference, whether you like the band to be stretchy or not. I settled on a sewn bind off. I wanted one of the berets to have a rolled up band. So after finishing the decreases, I made 10 knit stitch rows, or about 3 centimeters, with a 3 millimeter needle, and finished with the sewn bind off. This is how it looks. It also closely resembles the long tail cast on. And what I like about it is that, looking very neat, it is at the same time very stretchy and it feels very comfortable. You can see how very stretchy it can get from a seemingly small opening to a very wide opening. So I like that. In case you like this bind off method but are not familiar with it, I decided to include a short tutorial. I leave a yarn tail of approximately 3 lengths of the row. I am bringing the working yarn to the front, and I will first insert the tapestry needle knitwise or front to back into the first stitch of the row, and pull the yarn tail all the way through. Then I insert the needle back to front into the last stitch of the row on the right needle tip, and pull the yarn all the way through. And then I skip the first stitch and insert the needle knitwise or front to back into the second stitch on the left needle tip. Pull the yarn tail through and tighten. And then insert the needle back to front into the first stitch on the left needle tip. Pull the yarn tail through and tighten. And slip 1 stitch off the left needle tip. And now I will repeat. Insert the needle front to back or knitwise into the second stitch on the left needle tip, pull the yarn tail through and tighten. And then insert the needle back to front into the first stitch and slip that stitch off. And pull the yarn tail through and tighten. Again, repeat. Insert the needle front to back or knitwise into the second stitch, pull the yarn tail through, tighten, and insert the needle back to front into the first stitch and slip it off, pull the yarn tail through, and tighten. And again, insert the needle front to back or knitwise into the second stitch, pull the yarn tail through, tighten a little, and back to front into the first stitch. Pull the yarn tail through, slip that stitch off and tighten. Front to back into the second stitch, pull the yarn tail through, and back to front into the first stitch, slip it off, pull the yarn tail through, and tighten. Front to back into the second stitch, pull the yarn tail through, and back to front into the first stitch. Pull the yarn tail through, slip the stitch off and tighten. Again, front to back or knitwise into the second stitch, pull the yarn tail through, and back to front into the first stitch, pull the yarn tail through, slip that stitch off the needle tip and tighten. Front to back or knitwise into the second stitch, pull the yarn tail through, and back to front into the first stitch, pull the yarn tail through, and slip that stitch off the needle and tighten. Again, front to back into the second stitch, pull the yarn tail through, and back to front into the first stitch, pull the yarn tail through, slip that stitch off and tighten. So this is how the edge looks like. It looks very neat, and at the same time it is very stretchy. Here I'm finishing the binding off the last two stitches. I go knitwise into the second stitch on the left needle, pull the yarn tail through, and back to front into the first stitch on the left needle tip. Tighten, slip off that stitch, and now I have one stitch remaining, and I'll show you how to finish. I will insert the needle tip into the stitch next to the last stitch here. This is the first stitch of the row. So I'm inserting the needle front to back into the first stitch of the row, and finished. For the green beret, I decided to make a band that would match the design of the sweater. These are all the needle sizes I used. I used a 3.75 millimeter needle for the crown. Then I switched to a twisted knit stitch rib, and I used a 2.75 millimeter needle. And I followed with one knit stitch row and one purl stitch row using a 3.75 millimeter needle, and finished with a ice lining bind off method with a 3 millimeter hook. And here is a little tip for the beginners, how to hide the yarn tails. I actually hid the yarn tail on the right side, because once you roll up the rim, the wrong side becomes the right side and the yarn tail becomes invisible. And then I pulled it to the wrong side, and the rest of the tail I hid on the wrong side. So you can't really see anything on the right side when the edge is rolled up. And this is my most favorite moment of the entire process. Hiding the yarn tail for the stalk. This is the very last step. I push the needle through and pull the yarn tail inside, and ta-da, it looks nice. So after finishing, all the berets looked a bit lumpy and funny, but don't panic. After washing, I smoothened them out on a glass top table until they dry. And just make sure they look round and neat. And after drying, they changed and they became smooth and they look nice. And this is another beret. The brown one also looked very lumpy and very smooth after washing and drying. I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you in the next one.